The bullet that grazed Zachary Vance's shoulder in the summer of 1878 wasn't what brought him to his knees, but the realization that he couldn't read the deed to his family's ranch certainly did. Standing in the land office in Georgetown, Colorado, watching the clerk's lips move as he explained documents that might as well have been written in Chinese, Zachary felt a shame deeper than any wound. He was 24 years old, could break a wild Mustang, track a elk through 3 counties, and shoot a rattlesnake at 30 paces, but he couldn't decipher the letters that spelled his own name. His father had died 6 months ago, leaving him the ranch and a stack of papers he couldn't understand, and now some Eastern businessman was claiming ownership of the water rights. The clerk kept pointing to words on various documents, and Zachary could only nod, feeling like a child, feeling like a fool. He stumbled out of that office into the bright June sunlight, his hat pulled low, and nearly collided with a woman carrying an armful of books. They scattered across the dusty street, and Zachary dropped to his knees immediately to help gather them, apologizing profusely. The woman knelt beside him, and when he looked up, he found himself staring into the most remarkable green eyes he had ever seen. She was younger than he had first thought, maybe 22 or 23, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a face that was more interesting than pretty, full of character and intelligence. "I am so sorry, miss," he said, handing her the books he had collected, careful not to let her see how he held them, unsure which way was up. "No harm done," she replied, her voice warm and slightly amused, "though you look like you have had a worse morning than I have." Zachary stood and helped her to her feet, noticing the simple but well-made dress she wore, the ink stains on her fingers. Just some business troubles, nothing for a lady to worry about. "I am Rebecca Foster," she said, extending her hand in a forthright manner that surprised him. "And I am the new schoolteacher here in Georgetown. Business troubles often become everyone's troubles in a town this size." He shook her hand, feeling the strength in her grip despite her slender fingers. "Zachary Vance. I run a ranch about 5 miles north of town. Well, trying to run it." "The Vance Ranch. I have heard people speak of it. Your father was well respected." The mention of his father made Zachary's chest tighten. "Yes, madam, he was a good man, better than his son, it seems." Rebecca tilted her head, studying him with those penetrating eyes. "Why would you say such a thing?" Zachary realized he had said too much, revealed too much of his raw feelings. He stepped back, touching the brim of his hat. "I should let you get on with your day, Miss Foster. Again, my apologies for the books." But she did not move. "Mr. Vance, I have been a teacher long enough to recognize when someone is struggling with something I might be able to help with. If you ever need anything, the schoolhouse is at the end of Main Street. I am there most days, even in summer, preparing for the fall term." He looked at her for a long moment, something in her open, honest expression making him want to trust her, but the shame was too deep, too ingrained. "Thank you, miss, but I doubt you could help with my particular problem." She smiled, and it transformed her face into something truly beautiful. "You would be surprised what a good teacher can do, Mr. Vance." He watched her walk away, books cradled in her arms, and felt something shift in his chest. For 3 days, he thought about Rebecca Foster. He rode the property lines of his ranch, checking fences and water sources, and thought about her. He broke a young horse his father had been training before he died, and thought about her. He sat at his father's desk in the ranch house, staring at the papers he could not read, and thought about her. The stack of documents seemed to grow more threatening each day. The Eastern businessman's lawyer had sent more papers, demanding a meeting, and Zachary knew he was running out of time. On the 4th day, he rode into Georgetown. He told himself he was going to buy supplies, maybe talk to the sheriff about his legal troubles, but his horse seemed to know where he really wanted to go. He found himself in front of the schoolhouse, a neat white building with a bell tower and windows that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Through one of those windows, he could see Rebecca at a desk, bent over some papers. It took him 20 minutes to work up the courage to dismount. Another 10 to walk to the door. He stood on the threshold, hat in hand, feeling his heart pound like he was facing down an armed man rather than approaching a slip of a schoolteacher. He knocked and heard her call out for him to enter. The schoolhouse smelled of chalk and wood polish and old books. Rebecca looked up from her desk and her face brightened when she saw him. "Mr. Vance, what a pleasant surprise. Miss Foster." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I was wondering if I could talk to you about something, private-like." She set down her pen immediately and stood. "Of course. Please sit down." She gestured to one of the student desks near her own. Zachary sat, feeling ridiculous with his large frame folded into the child-sized seat. He turned his hat in his hands, searching for the words. Rebecca waited patiently, her hands folded on her desk, no judgment in her expression. "That day we met," he finally said, "you said I looked like I had business troubles. You were right. I have got papers piling up at the ranch, legal things about water rights and land boundaries and God knows what else, and I cannot make sense of them. Have you taken them to a lawyer? The only lawyer in town works for the man trying to take my water rights. And I do not trust bringing in someone from Denver or Colorado Springs. By the time I saved up enough money to pay a city lawyer, I might have lost everything anyway." Rebecca leaned forward. "Surely someone in town could help you wade through them. The banker, perhaps, or the minister." This was it, the moment of truth. Zachary forced himself to meet her eyes. "Miss Foster, I cannot read them because I cannot read anything, not a single word. I never learned how." The silence that followed felt like it lasted a year. Zachary watched her face carefully, waiting for the scorn, the dismissal, the pity, but Rebecca's expression remained steady, thoughtful. "I see," she said simply. "And you came to me because I am a teacher. I came to you because you said you might be able to help. And because, well, you seemed like someone who would not spread a man's shame all over town." "It is not shameful to have never learned something," Rebecca said firmly. "It is only shameful to refuse to learn when given the chance. My father always said that a man who admits his ignorance and seeks to remedy it is braver than any gunslinger. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was a teacher too, taught in Boston until he died 5 years ago." A flicker of old pain crossed her face. "My mother passed when I was young. It was just the two of us for a long time. He always said education was the great equalizer, that knowledge could open doors no amount of money could." Zachary nodded slowly. "So will you teach me? I can pay you. Not much right now, but once I get this legal mess sorted out, I can pay you properly." Rebecca stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that ringed Georgetown. "I will teach you," she said, "but not for money. Teaching is not something I do only when paid. It is what I am." She turned back to him. "But I have conditions. You must come to lessons regularly. You must practice what I teach you, and you must be patient with yourself. Reading does not come overnight, especially for adults." "I will do whatever it takes," Zachary said, standing as well, hope flooding through him for the first time in months. "When can we start?" "Tomorrow evening. After dinner. Say 6 o'clock. That will give you time to handle your ranch work during the day." Zachary felt like he should say something more, express his gratitude properly, but words had never been his strong suit even when speaking, let alone reading. "Thank you, Miss Foster. You do not know what this means to me. Call me Rebecca, please. If we are going to be spending time together, we might as well use Christian names." she smiled. And I think I have some idea of what it means. Education always means something profound to those who seek it. That night, Zachary barely slept. He kept thinking about Rebecca's green eyes, the way she had not judged him, the kindness in her voice. He also worried about being a failure, about being too old or too stupid to learn. His father had tried to teach him once, when he was a boy. But after his mother died, his father had needed help on the ranch more than he had needed an educated son. The letters had never made sense anyway, always jumping around on the page, switching places, refusing to stay still long enough for him to understand them. The next evening, he arrived at the schoolhouse at precisely 6 o'clock, freshly washed and wearing his cleanest shirt. Rebecca was already there, and she had set up a workspace at one of the larger tables with what looked like a children's primer, some slates, and several pieces of chalk. "I thought we would start with the basics," she said as he sat down beside her. "The alphabet. Each letter has a name and a sound, and once you learn those, you can begin to put them together into words." For the next hour, Rebecca introduced him to letters. She would write one on the slate, say its name, demonstrate its sound. A, B, C. He tried to copy them on his own slate, his large, calloused hands clumsy with the small piece of chalk. His letters were shaky and uneven, nothing like Rebecca's neat script. "You are doing well," she encouraged him when he expressed frustration. "Your hand is not used to this kind of work, that is all. It takes time to develop the muscles for writing." "I can rope a steer and mend a fence post and chop wood all day," Zachary said ruefully, "but I cannot make a simple letter look right." "Different skills, different muscles," Rebecca replied. She reached over and adjusted how he was holding the chalk, her fingers brushing his. The touch was brief, professional, but Zachary felt it like a spark. "Try holding it more like this, looser. You are gripping it like you are trying to strangle it." He tried again, and the letter was marginally better. Rebecca nodded approval. "Much better. Now try the next one." They worked through the first few letters of the alphabet before Rebecca called an end to the lesson. "That is enough for tonight. I do not want to overwhelm you. Practice these letters, just writing them over and over. The motion needs to become natural." As Zachary stood to leave, Rebecca said, "May I ask you something personal? I suppose that is only fair, considering. Why did you never learn? Most children attend at least some school, even out here." Zachary settled his hat on his head. "My mother died when I was 7. Influenza. After that, my father needed me on the ranch. We were barely scraping by as it was. He tried to teach me himself in the evenings, but I could never get the letters to make sense. They would jump around on the page, or I would mix them up. Eventually, we both gave up. Figured I was just not smart enough for book learning." Rebecca's expression grew thoughtful. "The letters jumped around. I know how that sounds, but that is what it felt like. I would look at a word and the letters would not stay in the right order." "That does not sound like a lack of intelligence," Rebecca said slowly. "I have read about such things. Some people's brains simply process letters and words differently. It does not mean they cannot learn to read, only that they need different methods, more time, more patience." Zachary was not sure what to make of that. "Well, whatever the reason, I never learned. And now here I am, 24 years old, starting where children start." "You are here," Rebecca said firmly. "That is what matters. Many men in your position would have been too proud to ask for help. You were brave enough to try." As Zachary rode home that night under a sky full of stars, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. Not just hope that he might learn to read, but something else. Something connected to the way Rebecca's face looked in the lamplight, the sound of her voice, the brief touch of her hand on his. The lessons became a regular part of his routine. 3 times a week he would finish his ranch work, clean up, and ride into Georgetown. Rebecca was always waiting, patient and encouraging. They worked through the alphabet, then moved on to simple words. Cat, dog, hat, man. Words that small children learned, but that represented entire worlds opening up to Zachary. It was slow going. Rebecca had been right about his brain processing things differently. He could not seem to keep B and D straight, no matter how many times she showed him. Words would sometimes rearrange themselves when he was not looking directly at them. But Rebecca never grew impatient. She tried different methods, using colored chalk, having him trace letters with his finger, connecting words to pictures. "You are making progress," she told him one evening in July, about 3 weeks into their lessons. "I know it does not feel like much, but you are. You are recognizing more letters on sight. Your writing is becoming more confident." "I still cannot read a sentence," Zachary said, frustration creeping into his voice. "How am I supposed to understand legal documents when I cannot even read a child's primer?" "One step at a time," Rebecca said. "You cannot build a house by starting with the roof. You have to lay the foundation first." Zachary leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. They had been working for over an hour, and his head ached with the effort of concentration. "Tell me something, Rebecca. Why did you come out here? To Colorado, I mean. Boston is civilized, cultured. This is barely more than a mining camp dressed up with a few nice buildings." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, her fingers playing with a piece of chalk. "Boston had too many memories after my father died, and too many expectations. There was a man there, a banker's son. Everyone assumed we would marry. He assumed it. He was pleasant enough, but he wanted a wife who would host dinner parties and pour tea and never have a thought more complicated than what dress to wear. When he found out I wanted to keep teaching after marriage, he was horrified. Said no wife of his would work, especially not at something as lowly as teaching." "Sounds like a fool," Zachary said. Rebecca laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. "Yes, well, I told him I would rather remain a spinster schoolteacher in the wildest territory I could find than marry a man who did not value what I valued. So here I am, teaching in Georgetown, Colorado, which is decidedly wild enough for anyone." "Georgetown's gain," Zachary said quietly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something warm and unspoken. Rebecca was the first to look away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "We should get back to work. Let us try these words again." As summer deepened, so did their connection. The lessons expanded beyond just reading. They began to talk about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Zachary told her about his father, about the loneliness of the ranch, about his worries that he would fail at the only legacy his father had left him. Rebecca spoke of her mother, whom she barely remembered but missed nonetheless, of the students she had taught in Boston, of her dreams of making a real difference in young lives. One evening in early August, as Zachary was struggling through a particularly difficult passage, Rebecca said, "You know, you could bring those documents here. The legal papers. Even if you cannot read them all yet, I could read them to you, help you understand what they say." Zachary looked up, hope sparking. "You would do that, of course. That is why you started these lessons in the first place, is it not? To understand what you are facing with your ranch." The next evening, Zachary brought a satchel full of papers. He laid them out on the table, and Rebecca began to sort through them. Her expression grew serious as she read, occasionally making small notes on a piece of paper. "This is more complex than I expected," she said after nearly an hour of reading. "But from what I can see, the man claiming your water rights is basing his claim on a survey done 15 years ago that supposedly shows the main creek running through what is now his property, not yours." "But that is not right," Zachary said. "The creek has always run through our land. My grandfather built the ranch specifically on that spot because of the water. You have an older survey, something that shows the original property boundaries." "I do not know. My father kept papers, but I never looked through them properly. Could not, obviously." "We need to go through everything," Rebecca said decisively. "Every paper your father left. There has to be something that establishes the correct boundaries." Over the next several evenings, they worked together on both reading lessons and legal research. Rebecca would read documents aloud while Zachary listened, his knowledge of the land helping him understand what the legal language meant in practical terms. Slowly, they pieced together the history of the ranch and the water rights. One night, as they were working late, Zachary made a breakthrough with his reading. He managed to read an entire sentence from the primer without help. "The man rode his horse across the valley." It was simple, basic, but it was a complete sentence, and he had read it himself. "I did it," he said, almost disbelieving. "I actually read that." Rebecca was beaming. "You did, Zachary, that is wonderful." Without thinking, caught up in the moment, Zachary reached across the table and took her hand. "I could not have done it without you. You have been so patient, so kind." "I do not know how to thank you." Rebecca's hand was warm in his, and she did not pull away. "You do not need to thank me. Seeing you succeed is thanks enough." They sat like that for a moment, hands clasped across the table covered in papers and books, and Zachary knew with sudden, absolute certainty that he was falling in love with Rebecca Foster. Maybe he had been falling since the day he knocked her books into the street. Maybe it had been inevitable from the moment she had looked at him without judgment and offered to help. "Rebecca," he started, then stopped, unsure how to continue. She was looking at their joined hands, a soft expression on her face. "Yes. I want you to know that these lessons, this time we spend together, it has come to mean a great deal to me, more than just learning to read." Rebecca raised her eyes to his, and he could see his own feelings reflected there. "It means a great deal to me too," she said softly. Zachary wanted to kiss her, wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything. But this was a schoolhouse, and Rebecca was a proper lady, and he was a barely literate cowboy who had no right to even think such thoughts. So instead, he squeezed her hand gently and released it, stepping back. "It is getting late," he said, his voice rough. "I should let you get home." Rebecca nodded, and if she was disappointed by his retreat, she did not show it. "Yes, it is late. Same time next session, I will be here." As August turned to September, their relationship deepened in ways both spoken and unspoken. Zachary was reading simple books now, slowly but surely. More importantly, he and Rebecca had found evidence in his father's papers of an older survey, one that clearly showed the creek within the Vance property boundaries. Rebecca had helped him write a letter to the county land office, requesting a new survey to settle the dispute. One Saturday, Zachary invited Rebecca to come see the ranch. "I know it is not proper for you to come alone," he said, "but I could ask my neighbor's wife, Mrs. Peterson, to come along. I just thought you might like to see the place we have been fighting so hard to save. And to be honest, I would like to show it to you." Rebecca agreed, and the following Saturday she arrived in a small buggy with Mrs. Peterson, a motherly woman in her 50s who served as a perfectly adequate chaperone while making herself scarce enough to give them some privacy. Zachary showed them around the ranch, the barn where his father had taught him to work with horses, the fields where they grew hay for the winter, the creek that was at the center of the legal dispute. "It is beautiful," Rebecca said, standing on a small rise that overlooked the valley. "I can see why your family fought so hard to build something here. My grandfather came here in 1855, Zachary said, standing beside her. "Before the gold rush really took off. He wanted space, freedom, a place to raise a family away from the crowded cities. My father was born in that house. He pointed to the ranch house in the distance. And so was I. Tell me about him, Rebecca said. Your father, you speak of him so rarely, but I can tell you loved him very much. Zachary was quiet for a moment, watching the wind move through the long grass. He was a hard man in some ways. Had to be to survive out here, but he was fair and he loved this land. After my mother died, he sort of closed himself off, poured everything into the ranch, into teaching me how to run it. I think he felt guilty that he never taught me to read properly, but by the time he realized I was not learning like other children, we were too busy just surviving. He would be proud of you now, Rebecca said, for seeking to learn, for fighting to keep his legacy. I hope so. Zachary turned to look at her, this woman who had come to mean so much to him. Rebecca, I need to tell you something. She met his eyes and he saw a mixture of hope and apprehension there. What is it? These past months, working with you, getting to know you, it has been the best time of my life. And it is not just because you are teaching me to read, though that is part of it. It is you. The way you laugh when I finally get something right. The way you never make me feel stupid, even when I make the same mistake a dozen times. The way you look in the lamplight when you are concentrating on a particularly difficult passage. I am falling in love with you, Rebecca. Maybe I have already fallen. I know I have no right to say this. I am just a cowboy who can barely read, and you are an educated woman from the city. But I had to tell you the truth. Rebecca's eyes had grown bright with tears, but she was smiling. Oh, Zachary, you foolish man. Do you really think I have spent every evening for months teaching you just because I am a dedicated teacher? I have been falling in love with you too. How could I not? You are one of the bravest, most determined people I have ever met. You work harder than anyone I know. You are kind and honest, and you care deeply about doing the right thing. The fact that you did not learn to read as a child does not change any of that. Rebecca, he breathed her name like a prayer. May I kiss you? I wish you would, she said. He cupped her face in his hands, these hands that were learning to write, learning to create words as well as work wood and rope. Her skin was soft against his calloused palms. He kissed her gently at first, almost tentatively, and then with growing passion as she responded, her arms wrapping around his neck. The kiss was sweet and fierce, and full of all the feelings they had been holding back for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. I do not have much to offer you right now. The ranch is still tied up in legal troubles. I am still learning to read. But if you will have me, if you will be patient with me, I promise I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you. You are already worthy, Rebecca said firmly. And I do not need much, just you, and the chance to build a life together. They kissed again, and this time when they broke apart, Mrs. Peterson was tactfully calling from near the house that perhaps they should come back for the lunch she had helped prepare. They walked back hand in hand, both grinning like fools. The rest of September passed in a blur of happiness. They continued the reading lessons, but now they were punctuated with stolen kisses and planning for a future together. Zachary was reading well enough now to manage simple texts on his own, though he still struggled with longer or more complex passages. Rebecca assured him that was normal, that he had made remarkable progress in just a few months. The legal situation with the ranch was also resolving. The new survey confirmed what Zachary had always known. The creek ran through his property, not the disputed land. The Eastern businessman's lawyer tried to contest the findings, but the evidence was too clear. By early October, the challenge to Zachary's water rights was officially withdrawn. We did it, Zachary said, reading the official letter himself slowly but accurately. The ranch is secure. You did it, Rebecca corrected. You fought for what was yours, I just helped you understand the paperwork. No, Zachary said, pulling her into his arms. We did it together. And I want us to keep doing things together, Rebecca. I want to marry you. It was not the most romantic proposal, delivered in the schoolhouse on a Tuesday evening with chalk dust on both their clothes, but Rebecca's eyes filled with happy tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. They were married in November, just as the first snow began to dust the mountain peaks. The ceremony was held in Georgetown's small church, with most of the town in attendance. Mrs. Peterson wept happy tears. The minister, who had befriended Rebecca when she first arrived in town, pronounced them husband and wife with a broad smile. And when Zachary kissed his bride, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The reception was held in the town hall, a simple affair with food contributed by various townspeople. As Zachary and Rebecca danced their first dance as husband and wife, she whispered in his ear, I have a wedding present for you. You are all the present I need, he replied. Nevertheless. She handed him a small package. Inside was a book, bound in fine leather. He opened it carefully and found the pages blank. It is a journal, Rebecca explained. I thought you might like to start writing down your thoughts, your experiences. You have learned to read. Now it is time to truly make the written word your own. Zachary was deeply moved. I will treasure this always. And I have another present, though this one is from both of us. She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. In about 6 months, you are going to be a father. Zachary felt like the wind had been knocked out of him, but in the best possible way. Truly, we are going to have a baby, truly. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, not caring that everyone was watching. When he set her down, he kissed her soundly. You have given me everything, he said. A future, a family, the ability to read and write and understand the world in a new way. How did I get so lucky? We both got lucky, Rebecca said. We found each other. That winter was hard, as winters in the Colorado mountains always were, but Zachary and Rebecca faced it together. The ranch house, which had been a lonely place for Zachary after his father's death, became a warm home filled with love and laughter. Rebecca continued to teach him, but now it was less about basic reading and more about exploring literature together. They read novels aloud to each other in the evenings, Zachary's reading growing more fluent with practice. He started writing in his journal, chronicling their days, his thoughts, his hopes for the future. He wrote about the blizzard in January that buried the ranch in 3 feet of snow, and how he and Rebecca had stayed warm by the fire, reading and talking and planning the nursery. He wrote about the calf born in February, premature and weak, that they had nursed back to health in the barn. He wrote about Rebecca's growing belly, how he loved to feel the baby kick, how she glowed with impending motherhood. In May of 1879, their son was born. They named him Thomas, after Zachary's father. The birth was long and difficult, attended by Mrs. Peterson, who served as midwife, and there were moments when Zachary feared he might lose Rebecca. But she was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and when the baby finally came, crying lustily, Zachary held his wife and son and wept with relief and joy. He is perfect, Rebecca said, exhausted but radiant. Look at his little hands. Zachary looked at those tiny hands and thought about how his own hands had changed. They were still calloused from ranch work, still scarred and rough, but now they could hold a pen. Now they could write his son's name. Now they could read stories aloud. He made a silent vow that his son would never struggle as he had struggled. Thomas would learn to read early, would have every educational opportunity that Zachary and Rebecca could provide. But more than that, Thomas would grow up seeing his parents work together, respect each other, love each other. He would see his father learning, always learning, never too proud to ask for help or admit what he did not know. He would see his mother teaching, sharing her knowledge, using her gifts to make their community better. As spring turned to summer, Rebecca began to talk about expanding her teaching beyond just Zachary. "There are other adults in town who cannot read," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset while baby Thomas slept in her arms. "I have heard some of the miners talking. They hide it, just like you did, but I can tell. And there are some of the older ranch hands who never learned. What if I started classes for adults? In the evenings after the regular school day?" "I think that is a wonderful idea," Zachary said, "and I could help. I mean, I am not a teacher like you, but I could talk to people, let them know they are not alone, tell them my story." "Would you really do that? I know it was hard for you to tell me. Would you be willing to be open about it?" Zachary thought about it. A year ago, the very idea would have been unthinkable. The shame had been too deep, the fear of judgment too strong. But now, with Rebecca beside him, with the proof that learning was possible even for someone like him, he felt differently. If it helps even one person come forward, one person get the education they deserve, then yes, I will talk about it. So Rebecca started adult literacy classes in Georgetown. At first, only a handful of people showed up, embarrassed and nervous. But Zachary was there, sharing his story, demonstrating that it was never too late to learn. More people came. The miner who had been hiding his illiteracy for 20 years. The widow who had always relied on her husband to handle anything involving reading. The young cowboy who had run away from home at 12 and never had the chance to attend school. Rebecca taught them all with the same patience and dedication she had shown Zachary. And Zachary helped however he could, offering encouragement, sharing his own struggles and victories. The classes became a cornerstone of Georgetown's community, something the little town was proud of. Zachary's own reading continued to improve. He started reading the newspaper regularly, keeping up with events beyond their small corner of Colorado. He read books on ranching, learning new techniques to improve his operation. He read to Thomas every night simple children's stories at first, but as his skill grew, more complex tales. And he continued to write in his journal, documenting their lives, creating a record for his son to read someday. 2 years after Thomas was born, Rebecca gave birth to their daughter, whom they named Catherine, after Rebecca's mother. And 2 years after that, another son, Henry. The ranch house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with children's laughter. The ranch prospered under Zachary's management, his newfound ability to read contracts and keep proper records making him a more effective businessman. But success did not change him. He remained the same honest, hardworking man he had always been, just better equipped to navigate the world. He never forgot what it had felt like to be unable to read, to feel stupid and helpless when faced with something as simple as a written word. That empathy made him a better employer, a better neighbor, a better man. One evening in the summer of 1885, 7 years after that first lesson in the schoolhouse, Zachary sat on the porch with Rebecca, watching their 3 children play in the yard. Thomas, now 6, was teaching his younger siblings to identify letters in the dirt with a stick. Catherine, 4, was struggling but determined. Henry, 2, was mostly just making a mess but enjoying himself immensely. "Look at them," Rebecca said, leaning against Zachary's shoulder. "Thomas is already such a good reader, better than most of the students in my regular class." "He has a good teacher," Zachary said, kissing the top of her head. "Actually, he has the best teacher in Colorado. I think I might be biased, but I happen to agree." They laughed together, comfortable in the life they had built. Zachary pulled out his journal, now his third volume, the previous two filled with his steadily improving handwriting and increasingly complex thoughts. He opened to a blank page and began to write, describing this perfect evening, his children playing, his wife beside him, the ranch secure and thriving. "What are you writing?" Rebecca asked. "Just recording this moment. I want to remember this exactly as it is. The way the sunset makes your hair glow, the sound of the children laughing, the feeling of complete happiness." "You have come so far," Rebecca said softly. "Sometimes I think about that day you first came to the schoolhouse, so nervous you could barely speak. Look at you now." "I could not have done it without you. We did it together," she corrected, echoing his words from years ago. "That is what love is, I think, doing things together, growing together, being better together than we ever could be apart." "When did you become so wise?" Zachary teased. "I was always this wise. You were just too busy struggling with the alphabet to notice." He laughed and kissed her, a kiss that held 7 years of love and partnership and mutual respect. When they broke apart, Thomas was calling for them. "Papa, Mama, come look, I wrote all of our names." They went to examine Thomas's handiwork, praising his writing, correcting his spelling gently, encouraging Catherine's attempts and even Henry's scribbles. And as the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Zachary Vance felt a contentment deeper than he had ever imagined possible. He had fought for his ranch and won. He had learned to read despite believing for years that it was impossible. But more importantly, he had found love with a woman who saw past his limitations to the man he could become, who had helped him grow without ever making him feel small. Together, they had built not just a life but a legacy, one their children would carry forward, one that proved education and love and determination could overcome any obstacle. That night, after the children were in bed, Rebecca found Zachary in his study, working on the ranch accounts. She watched him for a moment from the doorway, admiring the concentration on his face as he carefully tallied numbers and wrote notes in the ledger. His handwriting was neat now, confident, nothing like those shaky first attempts with chalk on a slate. "You remember the first letter I taught you?" she asked. Zachary looked up and smiled. You said it was both a letter and a word. I thought that was the strangest thing. And now you are doing accounts and writing in journals and reading bedtime stories. I am so proud of you." He stood and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "I want to tell you something. Something I have never told anyone, not even in my journal. When I first came to you that day, I was not just worried about losing the ranch. I was thinking about giving up entirely, not just on the ranch but on everything. The idea of living the rest of my life unable to read, unable to understand the simplest written word, feeling like a child or a fool every time someone handed me a document. It felt unbearable. You saved me, Rebecca, not just by teaching me to read, but by showing me that I was worth saving." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Zachary, you were always worth saving. You were always enough, reading or not. Maybe, but you made me believe it. And then you gave me the tools to become more than I was. You gave me yourself, your love, our children, this life. How do I ever repay that?" "By living it," she said simply. "By being happy. By continuing to learn and grow and be the man I fell in love with. That is all I have ever wanted." They held each other in the quiet of the evening, and Zachary thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From shame and illiteracy to love and literacy, from loneliness to a house full of family, from despair to hope. It had all started with a simple request in a schoolhouse, and it had led to everything that mattered. Over the following years, their family continued to grow and thrive. Thomas proved to be a voracious reader, going through books at a rate that impressed even his teacher mother. Catherine showed an aptitude for mathematics, able to calculate figures in her head faster than most adults. Henry, the baby, surprised everyone by announcing at age 4 that he wanted to be a teacher just like Mama. The ranch prospered. Zachary hired more hands as the operation grew, and he made sure to provide basic literacy instruction for any employee who wanted it. Word spread that the Vance Ranch was a good place to work, not just because the pay was fair and the boss was reasonable, but because a man could improve himself there, could learn to read if he had never learned before. Rebecca's adult literacy program in Georgetown expanded as well. She trained other teachers to help her, spreading the work across the growing town. She wrote articles for newspapers about the importance of adult education, becoming something of a regional expert on the subject. Eastern publications contacted her, asking for advice on setting up similar programs in their cities. Zachary supported her work absolutely, taking over more of the childcare duties when she needed time for her teaching and writing. He never felt his masculinity threatened by his wife's success or intelligence. If anything, he was proud to be married to such a remarkable woman, proud to tell anyone who would listen that his wife was the best teacher in the West. One crisp October day in 1892, Zachary was working in the barn when a stranger rode up to the ranch. He was well-dressed, clearly from the city, riding a horse that was too fine for ranch work. Zachary came out to meet him, wiping his hands on his work pants. "Can I help you?" Zachary asked. "I am looking for Zachary Vance," the man said. "You found him." The man dismounted and extended his hand. "Samuel Morris. I am a reporter for Harper's Weekly. I am writing a story about adult literacy programs in the Western Territories, and your wife's name keeps coming up. Everyone says that Rebecca Vance runs the most successful program in Colorado, maybe in the whole West. I was hoping to interview her, and you as well if you are willing." Zachary felt a familiar flutter of nervousness at the idea of his story being published in a national magazine, but it was muted now, manageable. He had told his story enough times that it no longer carried the crushing shame it once had. "My wife would be happy to talk to you," he said. "And I suppose I would too, if you think it would help." The interview took place that evening in the ranch house, with all 3 children quietly playing in the next room under the watchful eye of Mrs. Peterson, who was still a fixture in their lives. Samuel Morris asked thoughtful questions, and Rebecca spoke passionately about the importance of adult education, about how many people had been denied the opportunity to learn as children through no fault of their own. When Morris turned to Zachary, asking about his personal experience, Zachary found himself speaking openly and honestly. He talked about the shame and fear, about watching his father die knowing there were documents he could not read, about the desperation that had finally driven him to ask for help. He talked about Rebecca's patience and teaching methods, about the struggle and eventual triumph of learning. And he talked about what literacy had meant for his life, how it had opened doors he had not even known were closed. But the most important thing, Zachary said, was not learning to read, though that matters a great deal. It was learning that it was okay to not know something, okay to ask for help, okay to be vulnerable. That is what Rebecca really taught me. The reading was just a part of it. Morris scribbled notes furiously. "That is a powerful statement, Mr. Vance. And it speaks to something larger, I think, about how we view education and intelligence in this country." The article was published in December, spread across several pages with illustrations. It made Rebecca something of a celebrity, at least in education circles. She received letters from all over the country, from teachers wanting advice, from adults who had hidden their illiteracy, and were now inspired to seek help from communities wanting to start their own programs. Zachary's story became a symbol of hope for adult learners everywhere. Men and women who had spent years hiding their inability to read found courage in knowing that even a successful rancher, a man who managed a thriving operation and raised a family, had started from the same place they were now. Life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew. Thomas went off to college in Denver, the first Vance to receive higher education. Catherine followed a few years later, studying engineering, an unusual choice for a woman but one her parents supported completely. Henry did indeed become a teacher, working alongside his mother in Georgetown before eventually starting his own school in a neighboring town. Zachary and Rebecca grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They never ran out of things to talk about, never lost the sense of partnership that had defined their relationship from the beginning. They read together, worked together, faced challenges together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Zachary gave Rebecca a leather-bound volume. She opened it to find that he had copied out all of his journals, creating a single comprehensive history of their life together. Starting from that day, he had knocked her books into the street. "I wanted you to have this," he said. "Everything I have learned, everything we have built, all of it started with you. This is our story and I wanted it preserved properly." Rebecca read through the pages, tears streaming down her face. She could see his handwriting evolve from those early shaky letters to the confident script he now possessed. She could track his growth not just in writing but in thought, his observations becoming more complex and nuanced as his literacy improved. "This is beautiful," she said. "It is the best gift you could have given me." "You gave me words," Zachary said. "I wanted to give you the same thing in my own way." They danced that night, just the two of them in the ranch house parlor, to music from the same player piano that had been at their wedding. And as they moved together, Zachary realized that he could not remember the last time he had thought about those dark days before Rebecca, when he had been alone and illiterate and desperate. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different life. As they moved into their later years, Zachary and Rebecca became pillars of the Georgetown community. The ranch was now run day to day by Thomas, who had returned from college with new ideas and modern methods but a deep respect for his father's legacy. Zachary still helped out but had more time to devote to other pursuits. He started a lending library in town, donating his own collection of books and soliciting donations from others. It was not much compared to city libraries, but for Georgetown, it was a treasure. He read to children at the school when Rebecca needed assistance, his naturally commanding presence making him surprisingly effective at keeping a classroom in order. Rebecca, now in her 50s, had written 2 books on adult education that were used by teachers across the country. She still taught her evening literacy classes, though she had help now from several younger teachers she had trained. She corresponded with educators from Boston to San Francisco, always sharing ideas, always learning new methods. One evening in 1905, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done countless times before, Rebecca said, "Do you ever think about how different your life could have been if you had not come to me that day?" Zachary considered the question seriously. "I think about it sometimes. I probably would have lost the ranch eventually, unable to fight the legal battles. Maybe I would have ended up a ranch hand somewhere, still unable to read, still carrying that shame. Or maybe I would have found another teacher, learned another way. But I would not have found you, and that is the real difference. Everything good in my life stems from that moment in the schoolhouse, not just the reading but you." "I feel the same," Rebecca admitted. "I came to Georgetown running from expectations, looking for purpose. I found both here." I found my life's work in teaching, and I found my life's love in you." "We were lucky," Zachary said. "We were brave," Rebecca corrected. "You were brave enough to admit you needed help. I was brave enough to come west alone. We were both brave enough to fall in love despite our different backgrounds. Luck might have brought us together, but bravery kept us together." Zachary took her hand, noting how it had aged, how both their hands had aged, but they were still strong, still capable. Her hands could still write with perfect script. His hands could still manage a horse, still hold a pen, still turn the pages of a book. They were older, but they were together, and that was everything. Their eldest son Thomas married and gave them grandchildren, as did Catherine and Henry in time. The ranch house saw another generation of children learning to read, playing in the yard, growing up surrounded by books and love. Zachary read to his grandchildren as he had read to his children, his voice strong and sure, no longer stumbling over words. Sometimes when a grandchild struggled with reading, Zachary would sit down with them and share his story. "I was 24 years old before I read my first complete sentence," he would tell them. "And look at me now. I have read hundreds of books. I have written journals that fill a whole shelf. Your grandmother taught me that it is never too late to learn, and that struggling does not mean failing. It just means you are not done yet." These conversations always ended the same way, with the child's eyes wide with amazement that their capable, confident grandfather had once struggled as they were struggling now. It gave them hope, gave them determination to keep trying. In 1910, Georgetown held a celebration for Rebecca's 32nd year of teaching. The whole town turned out, including dozens of her former students, both children and adults. One after another, people stood to share how Rebecca had changed their lives. Minors who had learned to read and gone on to start businesses. Women who had finally been able to read letters from distant family members. Children who had grown into teachers themselves, inspired by her example. When it came time for Rebecca to speak, she was overcome with emotion. Zachary stood beside her, providing silent support, and finally, she found her voice. "I became a teacher because I believed in the power of education to transform lives," she said. "But you have all taught me as much as I have taught you. You have taught me about courage, about determination, about the human capacity for growth. Every one of you who came to me and admitted you needed help, who faced your fears and did the hard work of learning, you are all heroes in my eyes." She looked at Zachary. "Especially you. You were the first person I taught here in Georgetown, and you are still the one I am most proud of. Not just because you learned to read, but because you used that knowledge to help others. You never forgot what it felt like to struggle, and you turned that empathy into action. That is what true education looks like." The celebration continued late into the evening, with music and dancing and countless stories shared. Zachary and Rebecca danced again, as they had at their wedding, at their anniversary celebrations, at every important moment of their lives together. 32 years, Rebecca marveled. "Where did the time go?" "Into good work," Zachary said. "Into a good life. No regrets, Rebecca, not a single one." "No regrets," she agreed. As they aged into their 60s and then 70s, they slowed down but never stopped. Rebecca taught less frequently, but still consulted on literacy programs across Colorado and beyond. Zachary handed over more of the ranch operations to Thomas, but still took his morning ride around the property, still kept his hand in the work he loved. They read together every evening, sometimes aloud, sometimes sitting in companionable silence, each lost in their own book but together nonetheless. They had read their way through most of the classics, from Shakespeare to Dickens, from American novels to European poetry. Reading had become as natural to Zachary as breathing, though he never took it for granted. He remembered too well what it was like to be locked out of the world of words. In the spring of 1918, as the world grappled with war overseas and sickness at home, Zachary fell ill. It was pneumonia, the doctor said, serious but treatable with rest and care. Rebecca nursed him devotedly, reading to him when he was too weak to read himself, holding his hand through the long nights. "I am not ready to leave you," he told her one evening when his breathing was particularly labored. "Then do not," she said fiercely. "Fight, Zachary. You have fought for everything else in your life. Fight for this." And he did. Through the determined care of his wife and the skill of their doctor, and perhaps through sheer stubbornness, Zachary recovered. It took months before he was fully back to his old self, but by summer he was riding again, reading again, living again. "You scared me," Rebecca admitted one evening as they sat on the porch back in their familiar spot. "I thought I might lose you." "I am not going anywhere," Zachary promised. "We still have too many books to read together." She laughed through tears and kissed him, always the romantic. "I learned from the best." They were granted more years together, precious time that they used well. They traveled to Denver to see Catherine and her family. They attended Henry's son's graduation from university. They celebrated Thomas taking over the ranch completely, officially retiring from the work that had defined so much of Zachary's life. But they were never bored, never lost. They had each other, their books, their memories, their family. They had built something that would outlast them both. A legacy of education, of growth, of love. On a warm evening in July 1925, almost exactly 47 years after that first lesson in the schoolhouse, Zachary and Rebecca sat together on their porch. He was reading aloud from a book of poetry, his voice still strong at 71, the words flowing smoothly from the page. Rebecca, 70 years old, listened with her eyes closed, a peaceful smile on her face. When he finished the poem, he set the book down and took her hand. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in those familiar shades of gold and pink. "You remember," Zachary said quietly, "the first time I read a complete sentence." "The man rode his horse across the valley," Rebecca recited from memory. "How could I forget? You looked like you had just discovered gold. It felt like I had. It felt like the whole world was opening up." He squeezed her hand. "Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." "It was my privilege," Rebecca said. "Teaching you was one of the great joys of my life." "Was," he teased. "Past tense is," she corrected. "You are still teaching me things every day." "Like what?" "Like how to grow old gracefully. Like how to remain curious and engaged with life no matter how many years pass. Like how to love someone more with each passing day rather than less." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss between two people who had loved each other for decades and would love each other until their last breaths. The sun completed its descent below the mountains, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "Read to me some more," Rebecca requested. So Zachary picked up the book again and read by the light of the lamp that their grandson had brought out for them. His voice carried across the porch, across the yard, across the years. The words flowed from the page through his eyes to his lips, this miracle that had once seemed impossible, now as natural as breathing. Inside the ranch house, their grandchildren were visiting, filling the rooms with laughter and life. Thomas and his wife were in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The house that had once been silent and lonely was now always full, always warm, always home. And on the porch, Zachary Reed and Rebecca listened, and they were happy. They had found love beyond words, but they had also found love within words, love expressed through teaching and learning, through patience and determination, through the simple act of sitting together with a book as the stars came out. Their story became legend in Georgetown. The cowboy who learned to read, and the teacher who taught him, falling in love in the process, building a life together that impacted countless others. Adult literacy programs across the country cited their example. Teachers told their story to encourage struggling students. And in Georgetown itself, they were honored and respected, their lives a testament to what could be achieved through education and love. When Rebecca passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73, Zachary mourned her deeply, but not bitterly. She had lived a full life, had made a tremendous difference in the world, had been loved absolutely by her husband and children and grandchildren. He spoke at her funeral, reading from his journals about their first meeting, their first lesson, the moment he realized he loved her. There was not a dry eye in the church. She gave me everything, he concluded. She gave me knowledge and love and purpose. She gave me a family and a future. She taught me that it is never too late to learn, never too late to grow, never too late to become more than you thought you could be. I will carry her lessons with me for whatever time I have left, and I will see her again when my time comes. Zachary lived another 2 years, continuing to read voraciously, continuing to be involved with his grandchildren's education, continuing to support literacy programs in Rebecca's name. He established a scholarship fund for adult learners, ensuring that her work would continue long after both of them were gone. On a spring morning in 1928, his children found him in his favorite chair on the porch, a book open on his lap, a peaceful expression on his face. He had passed quietly, painlessly, still in the place he loved most, still surrounded by the words that had come to mean so much to him. At his funeral, Thomas read from one of his father's journals, the final entry written the day before he died. I am 73 years old, and I have lived a good life. Better than I ever imagined possible when I was a young man who could not read his own name. I have been blessed beyond measure with a woman who loved me, who taught me, who stood beside me through every challenge. I have children and grandchildren who make me proud. I have had the privilege of helping others learn as I once learned. If I have any wisdom to pass on, it is this. It is never too late to change your life. It is never too late to admit you need help. It is never too late to learn. And most importantly, it is never too late to love. Rebecca taught me all of that and so much more. I go to join her now with no regrets, only gratitude for every moment we shared. The story of Zachary and Rebecca Vance lived on in Georgetown and beyond. Their ranch prospered under Thomas's management and eventually passed to his son, keeping it in the family for another generation. The literacy programs Rebecca had pioneered continued to help adults learn to read well into the 20th century and beyond. Their grandchildren became teachers and ranchers and engineers, carrying forward the values of education and hard work and love that their grandparents had embodied. The schoolhouse where Rebecca had first taught Zachary was eventually turned into a museum, preserving not just her teaching materials but also Zachary's journals, giving visitors an intimate look at one man's journey from illiteracy to literacy, from loneliness to love. School children on field trips would read excerpts from those journals, marveling at the transformation of handwriting and thought documented in their pages. Their love story became the stuff of legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. The cowboy and the teacher. The man brave enough to admit he could not read, and the woman patient enough to teach him. Two people who found each other in a little mining town in the Colorado mountains and built something extraordinary together. But perhaps the most lasting legacy was the simple truth they had proven, that love can be found in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely people. That admitting weakness can lead to strength. that teaching and learning are acts of love in themselves. And that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the smallest steps, like a single letter written in chalk on a slate, like the first word read complete and whole, like a knock on a schoolhouse door and a simple request for help. In Georgetown, Colorado, to this day, there stands a statue in the town square. It shows two figures sitting together, a book open between them, their hands almost but not quite touching on the page. The plaque reads, Zachary and Rebecca Vance, teacher and student, husband and wife. Their love proved that it is never too late to learn, and that the greatest lessons are learned together. And indeed, their story continued to inspire. Decades after their deaths, adults who had hidden their illiteracy for years would find courage in knowing about the cowboy who had done the same. Teachers would remember Rebecca's patience and dedication when faced with difficult students. Couples would look to Zachary and Rebecca's partnership as a model of mutual respect and growth. The ranch itself became a living monument. The house where they had raised their children, where Zachary had written his journals, where they had read together on countless evenings, was preserved by their descendants. Visitors could see the shelves full of books, the desk where Zachary had learned to write, the porch where they had sat together watching sunsets. Each summer, the family held a reunion on the ranch. Descendants would come from all over the country, from different states and different walks of life, but all connected by those two people who had started it all with a reading lesson in a schoolhouse. Stories would be shared, journals would be read aloud, and the family would remember where they came from and the values that defined them. The littlest children would ask about their famous ancestors. "Tell us about great-great-grandpa Zachary," they would say. "Tell us about great-great-grandma Rebecca." And the stories would be told again, keeping the memories alive, teaching new generations about courage and love and the transformative power of education. Some of the family became teachers, inspired by Rebecca. Others became ranchers, following in Zachary's footsteps. But all of them understood that they carried a legacy, a responsibility to honor what their ancestors had built through their lives and love. The literacy programs that Rebecca had pioneered evolved with the times but never lost sight of their core mission. That every person deserved the chance to learn, that it was never too late, that education was a right, not a privilege. The Vance Family Foundation, established by Thomas and continued by his descendants, funded adult literacy programs across Colorado and beyond, touching thousands of lives over the decades. Every person who learned to read through one of those programs, who overcame shame and fear to admit they needed help, who persevered through the difficult work of adult education, carried forward Zachary and Rebecca's legacy. They might not have known the names, might not have heard the full story, but they benefited from what those two people had started all those years ago in Georgetown. In the end, Zachary and Rebecca's story was a simple one. A man needed help, a woman offered it, and in the process of teaching and learning they fell in love. But simple does not mean unimportant. Sometimes the simplest stories are the most profound, the most universal, the most capable of touching hearts across generations. They had proven that change was possible, that growth never stopped, that love could be found even in the most unlikely circumstances. They had shown that education was more than just acquiring knowledge. It was about transformation, about becoming more fully yourself, about opening doors you had not even known existed. And they had demonstrated that true partnership meant growing together, supporting each other's dreams, facing challenges as a team. Zachary had learned to read, but he had also learned to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to accept that he did not have to be perfect to be worthy of love. Rebecca had taught him to read, but she had also learned from him about courage, about perseverance, about the dignity of hard work and the importance of roots and land. Their love had been beyond words, yes, but it had also been expressed through words, through books read together, and journals written and letters exchanged during their brief separations. Words had brought them together and kept them together, connecting two minds and hearts across different backgrounds and experiences. As the years passed, and the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the world changed dramatically. Technology advanced in ways Zachary and Rebecca could never have imagined. The Wild West they had known became history, preserved in museums and books and stories. But the fundamental human needs that their story addressed remained constant. The need for education, the need for love, the need to grow and change and become more than we are. Their story was taught in schools, not just in Georgetown but across Colorado and eventually across the country. It appeared in textbooks about Western history, in case studies about adult education, in anthologies of American love stories. Scholars wrote papers analyzing the social implications of their relationship. Novelists used them as inspiration for fictional characters. But perhaps the most important legacy was the one that could not be quantified or measured, the hope that their story gave to people. Hope that it was never too late. Hope that education could change everything. Hope that love could be found when you least expected it. Hope that admitting weakness could lead to strength. Hope that two people, committed to each other and to growth, could build something beautiful together. In Georgetown, Colorado, where it all began, the story was passed down like a treasured heirloom. Every child growing up in that town knew about Zachary and Rebecca Vance. They knew about the cowboy who learned to read and the teacher who taught him. They knew about the love that grew through those lessons, the family that resulted, the legacy that continued. And sometimes, when someone in Georgetown was struggling with something, when they felt ashamed or inadequate or like they would never be able to learn what they needed to learn, someone would remind them of that story. "Remember Zachary Vance," they would say. Remember that he was 24 years old when he started learning to read. Remember that he went on to build an amazing life. If he could do it, so can you. That was the true legacy. Not the museum or the statue or the scholarship fund, important as those were. The true legacy was the courage that their story inspired in others, the determination to keep trying, the faith that change was possible. Zachary and Rebecca Vance had lived well and loved deeply. They had faced their challenges with grace and determination. They had built a family and a legacy that continued long after they were gone. They had proven that the most important lessons in life are often the hardest to learn, but also the most rewarding. Their story ended as all stories must, but its impact continued. In every adult who overcame shame to seek education, in every teacher who showed patience to a struggling student, in every couple who supported each other's growth and dreams, in every person who believed that it was never too late to change, to learn, to love. The cowboy had asked her to teach him to read. Through those lessons, they found a love beyond words, and through that love, they built something that would last forever, a legacy of hope, of growth, of education, of partnership, of courage. Their story became part of the great American narrative, a testament to what could be achieved when someone was brave enough to ask for help, and someone else was kind enough to give it. In the end, perhaps that is what made their story so enduring. It reminded people of the best parts of humanity, the capacity to learn, to grow, to love, to help others. It showed that great things could come from simple beginnings, that profound transformations could start with a single lesson, that love could grow from the most unexpected seeds. Zachary and Rebecca Vance had lived their lives in a small town in the Colorado mountains, far from the centers of power and fame. But they had touched the world nonetheless, through their actions, through their love, through the legacy they left behind. They had proven that you did not need to be famous or powerful to make a difference. You just needed to be willing to try, to learn, to grow, to love. And so their story lived on, generation after generation, inspiring people to be braver, kinder, more determined. The cowboy and the teacher. The student and the wife. Two people who found each other and built something beautiful together, something that lasted long after they were gone, something that continues to inspire to this day. Their love was beyond words, but it was also expressed through words, preserved in words, passed down through words. And in that, perhaps, lies the final irony. The cowboy who once could not read became immortal through the written word, his story told and retold, his journals preserved, his legacy documented for all time. It was a fitting end for a man who had worked so hard to master reading, for a woman who had dedicated her life to teaching. Their story became the lesson they would have wanted to teach, that it is never too late, that love conquers all, that education transforms lives, that courage and determination can overcome any obstacle. And in Georgetown, Colorado, where their story began, their memory lived on strongest of all. In the schoolhouse turned museum, in the ranch still run by their descendants, in the statue in the town square, in the stories told by older residents to younger ones. "Let me tell you about Zachary and Rebecca Vance," they would say. And another generation would learn about the cowboy who asked her to teach him to read, and through those lessons found a love beyond words.